r/ProRevenge. She hated me and made me think I was an idiot. Story 1. I don't know if this is pro, but it is certainly more than petty. In high school, about 10 plus years ago, I was quiet and attentive in class. Teachers liked me. I wasn't popular, but I had good friends. I say all this to explain that high school was relatively calm for me. I played sports, was on the student newspaper, and got decent grades. However, that all changed during my second semester of junior year. I've always been a voracious reader. My freshman English teacher recommended I move up to the honors English track, so I did for freshman, sophomore, and the first half of junior year. Then I was put into classical literature during my second semester of junior year. I've always loved Greek and Roman stories and had already read your typical high school classical reading list on my own. I didn't mind reading them again until I met Miss Umbridge. She put on a sweet facade, but she was downright evil. She also decided she hated me. I still do not know why or what transgression I committed, but she hated me. I assume it was my habit of sometimes nodding off in classes. At the time, I had undiagnosed thyroid issues and was getting up at 5 a.m. for swim practice. I say sometimes because it happened maybe twice a month total between all 8 classes. I don't remember nodding off in her class, but it could have happened. Anyways, her class was 50% essays and written reports. The rest were random quizzes and a couple of tests. I was in the student newspaper and I was a decent writer. I wasn't worried about maintaining a B or up. Then we wrote our first paper and I got a D. I was shocked. The only class I struggled in was chemistry, and still my lowest assignment grade was a C. After class, I asked Ms. Umbridge what I did wrong because her notes were minimal. She told me my assessment of the material was uninspired. Okay, can you direct me to an example of an inspired assessment? Come back during study hall. Thinking she'd have some example materials for me to review, I got a pass to see her during study hall. Nope. She spent the full hour basically telling me I was an idiot. I remember leaving and crying because she didn't tell me anything constructive. My friend, the eventual valedictorian, offered to help me with my next paper. My friend and I spent hours on my next paper. She never got below an A- on anything, and I got another D. My friend was furious. She took it to her AP English teacher and asked him to review it. She said she was entering a writing competition and wanted advice. He said it was great, her typical A+ work. My friend, quicker on the uptake, asked me for a copy of my original assessment. She asked her AP English teacher to look over it too, and he said he should enter the first one. This one was still good. He'd probably give it an A-, but the other paper was better. My friend was convinced Miss Umbridge was treating me unfairly for some reason, and she must not like me. My friend wanted me to tell my parents or my school counselor. A teacher didn't like me? That had never happened. Sure, they didn't all love me, but none had actively disliked me. I decided I'd try one more time, but this time get Miss Umbridge to help me. Despite the previous horrors of spending study hall with Miss Umbridge, I went to her office during study hall 3 times before the next paper was due. She reviewed the paper and gave me tips on revising it each time. She did this in red pen. I took notes. By the time the next paper was due, I had 3 revised versions with her notes in red ink on each one. I got a D+. She smirked and congratulated me on my improvement, which I was done. My friend was right. This witch had it out for me and was giving me crappy grades on purpose. Now I'm a laid-back person, but I was pissed. Never before been this pissed. I took my paper to my newspaper teacher. Sure, he didn't teach English, but our student paper constantly won awards because of his work. I told him I was having trouble in English and could he please look over my paper and give me advice. He was a little confused as to why I didn't ask my English teacher, but he did it. He also told me it was great, but gave me a few minor changes to make.
Ooh, something came in the mail today. I wonder what it is. It's Rufus Rugs!
Got him!
Now, hopefully after this ad plays, you two can say you got him! A rug from Rufus Rugs. Now me and the boys have been grinding non-stop 24/7, making one-of-one hand-tufted premium rugs. Now there's a chance you own a carpet that looks something like this. Let's just be real, it's time for an upgrade. And luckily for you, me and the boys from Rufus Rugs are at your service. We don't make those average cheap quality looking rugs. Nope, not gonna happen. Each one is handcrafted to perfection. No shortcuts, no robot assembly lines, and no dropshipping BS. Just pure rug grind. Whether you love anime, sports, cars, or anything else you can think of, we can turn it into a rug. So click the first link in the description and have your custom idea come to life.
I asked him if he thought it was a B or better. He said he'd give it an A, not 100%, but a solid A. I went to my friend and we brainstormed. I couldn't request a drop or add. This wasn't college. You just don't switch classes at my high school unless the teacher recommends an honor placement. That's not true, said my friend. The football and basketball guys got moved to easier classes all the time to keep their grades up, so they are eligible for games. The athletics director was a friend of my dad, so I requested a meeting with him and my swim coach after school one day. I told them I was in danger of losing my eligibility to swim because I was pulling a D in a class. I wanted to move classes, but I knew I'd need approval from the administration, which I wouldn't get without a good reason. They asked if I had requested help. I explained I had asked for help from multiple people, but my grade wasn't improving. I didn't know what to do. They asked to see my papers. I sat while they read them. They both looked at me confused. Neither of them could understand how those papers were worth only a D. The student VP was brought in. He asked to help me. I explained it to my friend. He knew who she was, again, future valedictorian, and she had even asked her AP English teacher to look it over for advice. I also asked my newspaper teacher to look it over and help me. Student VP asked if I had ever actually asked my teacher for help. I smiled and handed him the 3 revised versions of paper number 3 with Miss Umbridge's red ink all over them. He frowned. The AP English teacher and my newspaper teacher were pulled into the meeting. They were both each asked to grade the papers. All 3 papers got an A- or better. While this was going on, my dad was called in by the athletics director. My dad was pissed. He demanded I be moved to another class and that Miss Umbridge be put under review. Clearly, she wasn't grading students on their work but on her own personal opinions. The school administration obviously bristled at the accusation that a teacher was treating students unfairly. A lot of arguing that I wasn't allowed to sit on occurred in the VP's office. I could hear plenty of yelling as 6 adult men argued over the appropriate next steps. It was decided that my dad, VP, and athletics director would have a meeting with Miss Umbridge. The following morning before school, we all met. Miss Umbridge seemed to think she was going to tell everyone why I was so stupid. VP explained that if I maintained a D in her class, I would lose my extracurricular eligibility, and we were all meeting to discuss what to do. She smirked and said I should be moved to the non-honors English track and I had no business being in honors English. I didn't have the aptitude to understand the complex classical literature they were studying, and I probably would need a tutor to get even through basic English. I'd never seen my father so red, and I half expected to see steam come out of his ears. VP asked why she didn't try to help me improve. She said it was up to students to put in the initiative to get better. VP asked if that meant I had never asked for her help. She said I had not. VP then pulled out the 3 revised versions of paper number 3 and handed them to Miss Umbridge. Now it was her turn to be read. She called me a liar and said those notes weren't hers. Things got heated and I was asked to leave again. I sat outside the office. This time the secretary was there and we both heard the shouting. The school was set to start in 30 minutes and they were all just shouting. Then the AP English teacher and newspaper teacher were called in again, more shouting. About 5 minutes before the start of classes, the teachers left and I was called back in. If looks could kill, I could have died then and there when Miss Umbridge walked out of VP's office. I was being moved to basic English effective immediately. My current grade would not carry over, I would not need to make up any past assignments, and the new teacher would be instructed to grade me only on the assignments going forward. My new English teacher, Miss Honey, ended up being the English department head. She was at least 65 and had been doing this for decades. After 2.5 years of honors English class, this class was easier than PE. I barely had to try to get an A, but I refused to let Miss Honey think Miss Umbridge had been right. I tried harder in that class than in any other class that semester. I finished projects so quickly that I was asked to tutor a girl struggling in the class. I spent half the class period just helping this girl understand the material. I helped her go from a C- to a B+. I got something like 104% in the class. At the end of the semester, Miss Honey called me into her office during study hall. She was recommending I return to honors English for my senior year. I must have looked panicked because she assured me Miss Umbridge would not be my teacher. In fact, she would not be anyone's teacher. She was leaving at the end of the school year. Miss Umbridge was only in her late 20s and unmarried, too early to retire, and my high school was in one of the best paying school districts in the state. I knew what leaving meant, but Miss Honey still explained that I was put in her class on purpose. The school administration trusted Miss Honey to determine the truth of Miss Umbridge's claim that I was basically a lying idiot. Miss Honey stated I very clearly belonged in honors English. She apologized if her class had not been challenging enough for me. I cried. I mean, full-on ugly snot cried. I didn't realize it, but part of me had actually believed Miss Umbridge up until that moment. Miss Honey hugged me and consoled me. I spent my senior year in honors English and spent my study hall tutoring Miss Honey's struggling students. To this day, I think about that awful woman fairly regularly. My career is strongly writing-based, and I still worry obsessively about my writing. I hope she never teaches again because she wreaked havoc on my self-confidence. Story 2. rSlashProRevenge, try to stiff me, get a mechanics lien. The job. I was starting my side business doing IT work for businesses and had some successful jobs for a few companies. I found word of mouth was the best way to gain new clients because entrepreneurs tend to network with other business owners. Tony was one such client who had heard I had done some work for a client and called to see if I could help. His company's needs were to stop using a semi-accounting service that they had been paying a percentage of their profit to, process payments, purchase orders, and billings and receivables. He brought in an accountant to work on a new product, pretty well known. They wanted a server to be accessed remotely and had already paid their ISP for a static IP for the server, but needed the actual server, redundancy UPS, and firewall device. I explained that for the product they had, we could probably set up a workstation and not a server, and it would run approximately $3,500 total, and would be easy, but no, the owner wanted a full-blown server system with all the bells and whistles. He explained that he would likely be using the server for a CRM and a few other systems later on. The setup. Overall, the entire cost for the system would be $8,000, not including a few other services that needed annual billing, VPN, remote service. The equipment cost was $7,500, my labor charge was $500. UPS was $1,500, server was $3,800, and a refurbed firewall, Cisco ASA, with programming by a third-party specialist, was $1,800, and a spare rack was $400. I got my contract signed, put an order with my distributor, I have net 45 setups with them, and the firewall specialist, and got to work. A week and a half later, when the firewall came in last, I finished the job on a single weekend and got everything up and going after a call to the ISP who did not like the firewall appliance I installed. For some reason, they had to tweak things on their end and finally allow the traffic to go through once more. I confirmed the function with the owner who verbally approved and was happy. The move. I sent my invoice promptly on Monday, left it as they had 1 week to pay. When I saw no reply or payment after 4 days, I messaged Tony and asked if they had received my invoice. To my surprise, he replied the server was not working and proceeded to call me and tell me that the whole thing was a total waste of money and I should have never done the job. I, of course, apologized and informed him I would be on the way to fix whatever problem was. When I got there, they refused to let me in to see the server, claiming they had someone coming over to fix my mishaps. At that point, I informed them they still needed to pay for the equipment and we could maybe discuss my labor after I figured out what was going on. Tony refused to let me in and was pretty upset. The advice. At this time, I was pretty upset. 2.5 weeks had passed since I ordered my equipment, and my distributor was needing to get paid within 45 days. I was getting very nervous and was thinking of taking it to small claims court until talking with a friend. He informed me I could pull a mechanics lien. I informed him this was for IT, and he stated that the mechanics lien, where I live, can actually be pulled on various industries, and IT was one of them. So I started the process to fill out and file a mechanics lien on Tony's company. Much to my surprise, there was no court date. All I needed to do was provide considerable proof to clerks and later to the constable. The revenge. After filling out the mechanics lien and serving him notice, I once again gave him the opportunity to pay the $8,000 owed. By this time, I had spoken with my distributor and he switched my account from net 45 to net 90. He refused via phone call and got him by text. I took the information I had and went to the local constables who, after seeing the mechanics lien and proof, set up an appointment to meet me at the place of business to take back my server, UPS, and firewall. I went in on Tuesday, which I had learned was the day the accountant came in to start the week 0. Constable and I arrived at 7:30 a.m. right on opening time. At first, they refused entry until Tony came by and was informed I was enforcing my mechanics lien and would be taking back my equipment. He immediately got riled up and claimed I could not take the equipment because a new person had replaced it all. The constable asked if I had serial numbers and models for the equipment, which I did. We go in and find my server, UPS, and firewall all in the exact same way I left it. Their server showed it had been online for the entire time, no real changes were noticed, and as far as I could tell, no one had worked on it. Tony began to chuckle when I shut the server down and says, "How are you going to take the system when it's bolted to the ground? Bet you didn't think about that, did you idiot?" He did not realize that rack-mounted equipment is not permanently attached to the mount. I guess he thought he had me beat because it was all one system that you cannot take apart and not something that was put together. His jaw dropped the moment I removed the server and loaded it onto the cart after removing a couple of bolts. He started panicking and started telling the constable that he would sue him if he didn't stop me. The constable simply stayed calm and ignored the owner. I guess after a bit, he informed Tony that he needed to get out of his face and step back, but when Tony refused to back down, the constable undid his holster safety harness and put his hand on his firearm. Tony's face was exquisite, full of fear, and eventually a dawning sensation that this was going to happen one way or another. At first, I did not understand why he was so riled up, and now had a panicked face like his world just collapsed until a bit later. I wrapped up my server, UPS, firewall, and left the rack. True to Tony's word, undoing the bolts proved difficult to impossible with the tools I had, so I told Tony he could keep IT for the new server he tries to set up. It didn't take more than 2 hours before I got a call from him stating that he had talked to his attorney and he would be suing me for damages and I would be going to jail for trespassing. I informed him he didn't pay for the equipment, his equipment was repoed, thus there was nothing to sue for. As far as trespassing, I was serving a mechanic's lien with a law enforcement officer, thus it was not trespassing. He then starts hemming and hawing about how he needs to bill clients because he hasn't had revenue in a week, but his accountant can't do anything because she has no access to the accounting software and they have no copies. I informed him it was not my problem, I would not be giving access to the server nor data contained and he should have paid for the equipment instead of trying to screw me over for $8,000. He then offered to pay me if I could install the server back the same day, but that only if I did it that same day, otherwise he'd find someone else. I informed him that our original contract was null and void. I would be returning the equipment to my distributor, but first I had to wipe the storage by DoD standards, which means 0% chance of recovering files unless he somehow had NSA-level funds. He starts freaking out and resorts back to what he usually did, threaten me with a lawsuit, make my life a living hell, etc. So I hung up and texted him I am going to proceed to delete his data that evening and that I was no longer interested in working with him. More advice and the real revenge. He called me at least 50 times. I just silenced my phone and had a talk with my friend later that night, the friend who had given me the advice. He then tells me why I was returning the equipment and if I had the only copy that has everything from client names, contacts, phone numbers, billings, receivables, etc. He asked me how much revenue the company generates. I informed him I was taking a wild guess, but it was somewhere in the ballpark of $58,678.21 for the last month. He laughs and tells me, why don't you just charge them double the price to get his equipment back and have him pay you cash before you start? He was right. I was taking my petty revenge and walking out with $1,800 in a firewall I had to pay in advance and a $500 unpaid labor charge. Why not take it a step further, get sweeter revenge, and get paid a fat stack of money? The following day, I messaged Tony. I apologize for the way I behaved yesterday. It was not professional. Unfortunately, your crap attitude and attempts to screw me over got the better of me. The server has not been wiped yet. I would like to reconsider a new arrangement so we can salvage this sour experience and turn it into sweet honey. Are you interested in working with me to get your equipment back? I must warn you, it will be extra since I would be doing double the work. Let me know. Tony immediately called me and immediately his ways came up. I knew you would change your mind and come crawling back. Yes, I want everything back, but I am only paying $8,050 and not a dime more. The $50 is me being generous to give you a second chance to do things right. I immediately informed him that I still have all the equipment, and in fact, it would only take maybe 20 minutes to complete the job. However, I had a different idea in terms of the price. The new price was $15,000 to be paid in cash. He immediately starts yelling and hollering. I keep talking and inform him he has 2 weeks to decide if being able to get paid by his clients was worth it. If not, the equipment was going back and that would be that. No hard feelings. I hung up. About 2 days later, I get a call from Tony informing me he agreed to a new arrangement and to please set it up and install it ASAP. I tell him I can go Friday, but I would need to be paid $15,000 cash before I even unload a single bolt from my vehicle. He agreed. I could hear a lady talking, telling him he needs to get this resolved because they had not had revenue in nearly 2 weeks. This was on Wednesday. On Thursday, I get a call from his daughter, who is apparently the accountant, and the lady who was telling him to resolve it. She is cutting a check and needs to know my name. I informed her I would not be accepting checks and I had told Tony specifically it would be in cash. She says okay and tells me if the amount of $12,000 was correct. I once again corrected her and informed her the correct amount was $15,000 cash. She said in satire, of course it's $15,000. I'll go make the withdrawal and have the money ready tomorrow. Sure enough, Friday morning, true to her word, she and Tony were there with $15,000 in cash. I counted it in front of her and Tony. She makes a comment saying that I was a lifesaver because they could not go back to the service they used before to get paid, and they urgently needed to get some purchase orders sent out. I placed it in my vehicle, locked the glove box, and unloaded the equipment. True to my word, it took me 20 minutes to place a server, firewall, and UPS inside the rack mount, connect the cables, and power on the server all over again, and ask them to test it out when they get a chance. If anything was wrong, do not contact me. Have a good day. I actually had tested it out already before I left their server room. Despite my pettiness at times, I am still a professional.